Welcome to the next session in the Medicine to Market Brand Breakthrough Summit. I'm Frank Dolan from Arsenal. Let's have some fun today. Let's talk about embracing uncertainty and thinking about flexible go-to-market approaches, that is for sure. As you heard in our opening session, we did talk a bit about the uncertainty in the market and the impact that it has to some brands. Specifically, one of the larger consulting firms took a look at what's happened over the last couple of years with some launch brands and looked out to 2025 and tried to measure the impact that it might have financially on brands that are not necessarily performing as we would like. That number was $19 billion worth of negative impact. So uncertainty, if you have a launch brand, is very, very real, but there are certain techniques that are tried and true. We're going to talk about those a bit today, and there's probably some new ways of thinking. We'll talk about those tools and those frameworks as well. And to do that, we're going to bring up a few industry peers, experts, if you will, that we trust to give us sage guidance. I want to introduce Damon from Alkermes. Damon is an incredibly accomplished professional at Merck, has been at for many years here in the Boston area at Alkermes. Damon, please introduce yourself to the audience and welcome.
Hi, thank you, Frank. Hello, everybody. As Frank mentioned, I spent almost 20 years at Merck in a variety of U.S., ex-U.S., and global positions. Moved up to the Boston area about 8 years ago now to work for a company called Alkermes, and my first job in that company was commercial strategy for new products. So this topic is certainly right in my wheelhouse. And right now I run the psychiatry franchise, where we have one product in market, one product approved, that will come to market next month. So I'm still very much in the new product world and on the edge of this conversation.
Well, Damon, thank you for giving your time and your treasures to be here. I really do appreciate it. So welcome once again.
No, thank you.
Great to have you here. Next up, Paul Marasco, who's at Ipsen. He's doing some really, really cool things and has been someone who's been very much an industry thought leader when it comes to all things omni-channel, digital, and beyond. With the three folks you've got on the screen right now, we're going to add a fourth in a minute. You've got a lot of experience, but that's not saying anything about our age. It's just lots of wisdom. But Paul, tell us a little bit about your career and what you're excited about right now.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. It's always great to be on with you. Yeah, my career, and I don't think we can say it has nothing to do with age, but my career is now verging on 30 years in healthcare. A lot of it was at J&J in med device and consumer, and then in pharma. I've also been in Sanofi and now it's in Ipsen, heading up digital customer action for Ipsen for North America. Past decade or so, really been focused on all things digital. However, I'm the guy that's a traditionalist. I grew up in sales and marketing roles, and although I always promote new ways, innovative ways to reach customers and engage with customers, be it in an established brand or a launch brand, I can't be far removed from my roots of carrying the bag. So I think what we're going to talk about is how to go about this in this new way of doing business. How do we engage using, what we're traditionally MPP, which you've heard me say before, shouldn't be non-personal promotion. It's the new personal promotion. And how do you mix that and interact with face-to-face and pull that all together so that you have a really omni-channel, customer-centric way of dealing with our HCPs. So look forward to the conversation, and we'll see where this goes.
Well, it's great to have you here, Paul, and you've been very generous, spending lots of time with us in the past, so today's going to be a real treat, so welcome back for sure. All right, and next we're going to bring up Sandy Donaldson. Sandy's got a great career at UCB, as we were talking a little bit earlier before you all joined us. Sandy caught what I also have, which is the entrepreneurial bug after a long time in biopharma. But Sandy, you're doing some really cool things now. Tell us a little bit about your background, and also let me extend a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Frank. So I'm not from the US, as you might hear. I'm actually from Scotland originally. And just in case you might not understand some of the the words and things like that. It's Scottish is basically a mixture of English and whiskey, so I apologize in advance if there's anything that doesn't come out correct. So yeah, thanks, Frank. Great to be here. I'm super excited and to also join the other panelists. My background is in medical devices and pharma. And, I spent quite a bit of time in Europe developing new services and bringing products to market. And then at UCB Pharma, I led various digital marketing roles, culminating in leading their global omnichannel group, being based here in Atlanta. This is a real topic which is very interesting for me because I left UCB last year because I could see that there was change needed. I could see that new solutions would be required to actually support our ongoing engagement with healthcare practitioners. So I created Empiricus, and I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Empiricus, which is a new platform for pharma to engage with the healthcare ecosystem.
Very, very cool. So I want to build a strong foundation for all of us as we talk a bit about a little bit of embracing the uncertainty that's out there and go-to-market approach. We've got a lot of brands. As we take a look at the PDUFA calendar, there's a lot that's coming soon, that's for sure. And I just want to build a framework for thinking about how we work with existing brands or even new brands in the coming days and months. But let's build that foundation first. And before I ask any of the panelists to start to share their wisdom, I just want to make sure that everyone is very, very clear that everyone here is upon their own volition and their opinions are their own and not of that of any of their current or past employers. So Damon, I'm going to turn to you. I want to leverage that experience that you described that you had earlier. When you think about go-to-market strategies that may be tried and true with things you've been involved in deep in your past, what things you felt made up a really strong launch strategy, and maybe connect those which you feel will be foundational even in the days moving forward?
Sure. So I think some things about launch strategies that have always been true and are never going to change. When you get to the point of launch, your strategy needs to be fully buttoned up. You need to fully understand the market you're going into. You need to fully understand the customers, and you need to understand the value proposition of your product, where it differentiates or does not differentiate. If, as a part of your launch strategy, you're including things like engage with this customer to better understand them, or go to this setting to better understand where our product fits, you're not going to have a successful launch. Those are things that you need to have a full knowledge and understanding of by day one. You can't still be solving for those things. That is the hallmark of an unsuccessful launch. So if you're thinking that part of your strategy is to deepen your understanding of the marketplace, you're probably in trouble on the first day. One thing that I'd say used to be true in pharma and has, I think, changed is the way that companies have to engage with payers and the market on that day one mentality. I certainly know decades ago, the idea was you had to be all things to all people on day one. Whatever the perceived value propositions of your product, you tried to sell every single one of them on the first day. And I don't think that's really a functional model anymore. I think you really need to understand how to prioritize your opportunities. Where's your first business going to come from, and where do you get the most leverage, and how are you going to be successful there before you start thinking about some of those other priorities that, yes, will be important, but aren't as important at day one. The expression I've used with people before is sometimes the best way into a big room is through a small door. And I don't think that's how pharma used to think. We used to try and think we're going to go great big through the front door and batter ram our way right in there. The way the relationship is with the market and payers at this point, I think you're more likely to be successful focusing on your highest priorities and slowly growing the business over time. I think one of the misunderstandings about payers is you can super proactively and aggressively engage with them. In today's world, that doesn't motivate them to really move any faster. They're going to take all the time they want. They're going to follow their regular NDC blocks, and it's not going to really matter how aggressive you are. And I don't think you're going to change that unless you literally have a life-saving, only in class, only treatment available type option. Payers have other treatment options, and they're going to make sure that they leverage that as a part of those negotiations.
Great comments. It's funny when I think back. at some of the launches I've been involved in. Boy, the message ever sounded was in market research. And then we put it in front of patients and payers and providers in the real world. Things sometimes changed, which is interesting. We want to get around that. So Damon, thank you for those foundational comments. So Paul, I'd like to include you on this one. I know that you're doing a lot of future casting, if you will, thinking about the landscape over the next few years with what you're up to currently. So when you think about some of the new rules and some of the new tools when it comes to launch with these different customer constituencies, what's really grabbing your attention right now? What's worth sharing with our audience today?
Well, I think the point that was mentioned, an economic buyer cannot be underestimated at all. We used to, really believe it was a HCP sell, and that has changed years ago and continues to change. So we need to make sure we get the message out. And I also agree, it's not about the aggressiveness, but it's about the proactive and what you do even pre-commercial to get the message out and start having the right conversations. If you look forward though, it used to be a standard of, yeah, we need to have formulary. You need to be on the formulary, otherwise you won't get your script written, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's not only a table stake now, but it's not just about the formulary. You gotta start understanding, and you gotta start working with the EHRs. You need to really start making it so that when you do all the other parts of your sell and you're ready to have someone write that script, it's easy in the EHR to do so. You're using the data of the EHR to actually help you, and those insights drive what you need to do and where. You need to really start looking at how does the Salesforce and the MSL team, although they need to be separate, I'm not suggesting they combine, but they need to really work in unison more than ever before, because the message is not just going to be a message that is going to be delivered by one or the other. It's going to be delivered in unison to multiple parties. And I agree, you don't try to go and boil the ocean, but you need a precise, attainable plan that really checks the handful of key boxes, because without that, your launch, no matter how well thought out internally, and I think that's the key, thought out internally, will not be successful.
Very true. It's such a multifactorial world that we live in, and it's a multifactorial world, initiative world that our customers are certainly exposed to. So, on that note, Sandy, I'll bring you into the conversation here. I want to talk a little bit about HCPs specifically. So, as we think about all of our experiences, there are no doubt that between the ideas we have internally and all of the resources that are available externally, there are lots and lots and lots of ways to approach and compete for that HCP's attention. So let's dial into this attention piece a little bit. What do you see happening right now with HCP attention, and how can we work to capture more of it?
Sure, great question, Frank. And before going into answer more of the specifics on the critical success factors to get the attention, we actually have some interesting data that we can share with the audience today on physician preferences. So with Empiricus, it's basically an engine which is always trying to listen to physicians, and we build elegant tools for them. But what we also do is we do a lot of surveys. So we actually asked physicians during COVID, and the time period was from May 2020 through to May 2021, about their engagement preferences. So I can share a bit of that data, which I think is pretty interesting for your audience. So for the 247 respondents, and apologies, I will look down in my notes just so I get the numbers exactly correct. They were basically made up of specialists, dermatologists, and oncologists. And of the respondents, of that 247, 44% of them in that time frame either couldn't see a rep because of institutional restrictions or chose not to see a rep in that time frame. We did see that 11% of the respondents did participate in a virtual or a face-to-face interaction, but 90% of the respondents would prefer to have fully virtual interactions with reps and MSLs going forwards. 7% of them did want to actually maintain the face-to-face interactions from the past that they would like to keep for the future. And what was really interesting is that if you look to the metric of would they actually proactively engage with pharma resources, during that time frame, 12% of the respondents actually proactively went to look for a sample, or they went to go to a product website. And of that number, only 9 actual physicians, that's 3%, found that it was easy and seamless and frictionless to be able to access those resources. So interesting, just a little bit of a change there in terms of the evolution of how physicians are wanting to engage. And I think, Frank, when we come to talk a little bit about some of the critical success factors from my own kind of personal belief, I think there's a few things that we all need to take into consideration. It really is, number one, about building agility. If we want to be able to tackle the uncertainty, and the agility building, from my personal experiences, in 2 areas. Number one, it's creating more on-demand channels. It's ensuring that when physicians actually have a need and a request, that we're there. And the other is building infrastructure around those on-demand channels so that we can quickly and accurately answer those questions or support requests that come in. I think another key thing, and Paul alluded to this too, is the integration with the field sales force. The reps and MSLs are still going to be very important in our engagement with the healthcare ecosystem, but we do need to understand how that's going to all play together. I think another key part is also understanding what are the real physicians' challenges that they face today. With Empiricus and with my exposure in the last year of being able to work hand in hand with physicians, I get to see what their real challenges are. And in many cases, they go really past the pill. So I'd encourage our pharma clients and pharma partners as well to continue to focus on understanding what the real challenges are, and then work with partners and third parties to try and roll up their sleeves and put in new solutions for them.
Thank you, Sandy. That's a helpful perspective. I think it's really important to have the voice of the HCP in a lot of these conversations, because our industry needs to appreciate that. We need to serve these folks, and that we're not the only industry calling on the HCP, trying to get their attention, trying to solve their problems, make their children healthy, wealthy, and wise, and beyond. So let's keep the conversation kind of moving forward. When it comes to many of these initiatives, Damon and then Paul, if you will, please help us understand the last year and a half. Many of us have faced challenges or seen opportunities, and we've thrown a lot of different initiatives, tools, tactics at these sorts of things. When you talk to your peers across the industry in the many months or the next couple of years moving forward, do you think that organizations are largely going to continue to experiment and pilot a lot of initiatives, or are we getting kind of like pilot fatigue at this point? Damon, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I want to create a basic framework before I dig into that, and it sort of maybe to tie up a little bit of the first part of the conversation is when you're thinking about commercial activity, commercial strategy, marketing, there's 3 questions that you need to ask yourself, and you ask them in this order, and this is where pharma has a long time gotten this wrong. Most important is, who are you selling to? Then it's, how are you going to sell to them? And then it's, what are you selling them? And pharma has tended to fixate on the what because of all the time and energy that goes into actually developing a molecule. I think there's an over-fixation of the what is the thing we're selling. Through COVID in the last year and a half, what we're selling hasn't changed. Who we're selling to hasn't changed much either. In some areas, you've seen a little bit of move between specialties or primary care just because of access issues. But what has changed is the what are you selling? And in my view around the work that's happened there is, I think the market is moving too quickly and is too supple and too unpredictable for companies to really think they're going to wind up and take a huge swing at some master project. I don't think it's likely to be effective. I don't think it's likely to be timely, which means you really need to engage in a mindset of continuous incremental improvement. The how am I going to do this needs to continue to evolve and get better. And I don't think you necessarily treat them as pilots. I think you're just looking at your business and trying to figure out what's the next thing that I could do a little bit better. Or am I getting feedback that tells me the thing that is most broken in my system may sit over here and I need to address it? But I think, again, it's going to be incremental improvement over time. I think the market is just too volatile to think that you're going to build some master plan that's going to take 6 months to idealize and 6 months to develop, and you're going to roll out there and crush the world with it. I think by the time you get there, you're not going to have full contact. It's not going to do what you originally designed it to do. And it's probably not a great way to use your resources. So that's my take on it. Is I wouldn't call it pilots per se, but I think you've got to embrace a mindset of incremental improvement and problem solving.
I think that's really great advice. Things are just there's too much existing uncertainty, but that need for agility, that seems like really sage advice for sure. And also taking the time out to really pass the test when it comes to having some certainty and granularity around, have we really measured these new initiatives the right way in which they can be measured? Maybe not always what is suggested to us by others, but to be flexible and agile with the measurements as well. So, Paul, do you want to build on those comments and advice around the pilot fatigue and beyond?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we shouldn't mince words over pilot or trial or whatever. We just need to continually look to innovate and try different things, and we have to be quick. We have to be nimble. I mean, the great thing about digital, we all know this, but I think sometimes forget is the great thing about digital is, for the most part, it can be implemented quickly. We can see how it's working quickly, adjust or kill quickly. And I think we have to become better at that. We need to be better at those quicker intervals and not be afraid to stop something when it's not working. Don't just keep, let's give it some more time. It's only been 2 quarters. Let's move quickly on that. I think we also have to start realizing, to the earlier point about that time and 6 months, a year or whatever, for the most part, I think there'll still be some out there, but the day of the blockbuster is going to be few and far between. So the model has to change, how we go about and what's really important. And you mentioned measurement. Measurement is key, but it shouldn't be measurement for measurement's sake. It should be measuring the right KPIs that really show engagement, interaction with, the content, the message. This question started off, Frank, around, connecting with HCPs. Well, let's be honest, there's a lot of competing interests for everyone's time today. HCPs are no different. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be looking to sell HCPs as much as making sure they are prepared and able to treat the patients. Because the reason any of us have decided to stay in healthcare is because fundamentally you believe at the end of the day what you're doing, regardless of what it is helping improve the quality of someone's life. So that has to come through with all the initiatives. Call them pilot, call them tactics, whatever you want to call it. But all we do, if it's not going to impact and hopefully improve a patient's quality of life, we should question why we're doing it.
Very fair. There's a term, the right message to the right customer at the right time, which in my career, I kind of grew up on that term, but I feel like perhaps what is missing from that is on the front end, which is earning the right to have, the right message to the right customer at the right time. So Sandy, with your interaction,
Frank, can I jump in real quick? I want to double down on something that Paul said.
Sure.
And he mentioned it earlier, where you used to see these physician buying processes and you thought you understood that in market research because you understood that you knew what the doctor was going to do. And years ago, those were ignorant of the fact that the environment that they practice in is deeply influenced by the payer. So almost more important than the individual physician sometimes is what's the environment they practice medicine in. And I think some of the technical things and the innovation that Paul's talking about and that Sandy are talking about are really actively changing the environment that today's HCPs practice in. And if you don't understand the environment the HCP practices in, you're actually not going to do a very good job of meeting their needs or predicting where they're going to go or how they're going to react to your product. So it's something learned a while ago as the payers evolved things was the physician's environment matters a huge amount because of the way payers affect it. Now I think it matters a huge amount because the way they practice, where they practice, the technical things at their disposal is changing quite rapidly. And if you don't have your head around that, you're not going to have a positive engagement with them.
I would agree. I mean, it's funny you echoed my words, so I totally agree with that. But it's not only about that, but I would actually take it because we miss this sometimes. Physicians are people, and every person has a preference. We are now at the stage that we should be able to understand preferences. We should be able to use that. And remember, it's not how we want to engage with them, it's how they want to be engaged with. And I think one thing the industry is going to have to really get better at is the evolution from the traditional push of content and everything we want to tell them to the pull and letting them get what they want, where they want, how they want, and when they want.
So I think,
And
Paul,
that push-pull is going to be a big change.
it's important to just look a little bit closer at that evolution because it really has come around pretty quickly. You know, we all started our careers in healthcare and in pharma many moons ago where the equation of success was very different. And it's not less sophisticated, but it's certainly less complex than it is now. And gone are the days where, you know, we go in to speak to physicians or even payers and with a message and you tell it 12 times. The sophistication and complexity is very different now with all of the different channels and all the different ways that we can get information. So it's more important as well to have hypotheses. And I like Damon's framework and how we need to focus more on the how. But having hypotheses where we can understand the levers of that very complex, that ever-growing complex equation on how we actually get our messaging across and how we can partner. And you hit on that point as well, Paul, where it's not anymore just about telling them about what the product does, but how can we help them prepare? How can we support them in their delivery of valuable healthcare to the patients as well?
Powerful points. So Sandy, let's build on this a little bit more when it comes to HCPs and being there for them when they need us most. How are you guys trying to deliver on that promise of us standing in plain sight the moment they need us?
So from our company's point of view, from Empiricus's point of view, we are trying to make the lives of physicians much easier because we do understand the challenges that they face. So in all the research and all the verbatims that we get, we do hear the pain points, and we're putting in place lots of tools to try and support that. And you know, our key tool is Concierge, which literally acts as a kind of digital butler so that the physicians can literally ask for support for anything. Be that, you know, who is my rep, who's my MSL, or can you help me get a sample or help me with a prior authorization? So from our point of view at Empiricus, Frank, that's what we're trying to put in place, is to reduce the friction and to give physicians a kind of excellent place where they can automatically get support to help them and to help get their patients on therapy. What I was going to just add, one interesting insight that we're also seeing is support required for other segments that might not traditionally be in the target lists of the pharma companies. And I certainly see, you know, our traditional way of creating target lists is based on existing sales and market potential. But there's a huge growing number of potentially younger physicians or physicians that wouldn't have automatically been pulled into a target list who are now actively reaching out to Empiricus to ask to get samples, to ask to get support, to ask to get a rep. So one key insight I would also provide to our pharma partners on the call is continually remember that your target list is a static snapshot. there's a huge number of physicians today that are looking for your help and your support.
Excellent stuff, Sandy. So, Paul, let me ask you a question. With all of the different initiatives and us trying to be, customer centric, how do you help coach other leaders who are looking at these different initiatives that they're putting in front of the customer, HCP, payer, patient, pick whatever you'd like. But with all of the different efforts and all of the different investments and all the different ways of measuring success, how do you help coach others who are trying to figure, like, I just want to know what like the top 3 things are that are working?
Well, I think it goes back to any initiative you do needs to be tied to your strategic imperatives. You should not be doing innovation or change for innovation's sake. And you need to make sure that what you're measuring actually can be tied to, let's be honest, the closest to ROI that it can. So that's why I always say we always have to have our KPIs and what we're looking to judge ourselves against as an engagement metric. An engagement metric, I like to personally make sure things are tied to, those leading indicators, those key assets that we know. For example, if we have a doctor discussion guide and we know that, we have the data that shows that after so many doctor discussion guide downloads, we usually get a script, or we know that that's a precursor because they are now going to have an appointment, or if it's a find a doc on the website, or whatever, you consider those key assets. We need to measure against that. It's no longer about an open rate. It's no longer about time on a site, because once again, all those things don't really mean anything besides activity. It doesn't talk about engagement. And more importantly, we need to make sure we have an understanding using insight, using data to drive insight, an understanding of what, be it the economic buyer, is looking for. Like, how do we help them in their day-to-day activity? How does the HCP get what they need? How does the patient or caregiver get what they need to feel comfortable making that appointment and having the conversation? And putting that all together and measuring those important factors is where we need to go to and get away from what I consider very outdated initial digital metrics.
Okay, so on that note with metrics, our second to last question, Damon, I'd like to pose to you. And this is really about you helping us lead our teams and our brands. When you think about what a best practice should look like in today's environment and let's say moving forward, if a member of a team is coming to the leader with an innovation, maybe something they want to create, something they want to do, something they want to bring in, when it comes to this metrics and KPI piece, how important is it for them to lay out that KPI piece to you in the early stages of ideation before we go crazy digging into throwing money and resources at something new?
It's important, but it's not the question, right? So when you're looking at your extended team, everybody in the extended team should be able to tell you what are the 3, 5, whatever the right number is. What are the 5 things that we need to do to be successful as a brand? Everybody should be able to articulate that to you. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody on the team is actually going to be driving in all 5 of those areas. There may be a couple they don't touch because of the normal walls between medical and commercial marketing. But everybody should be able to articulate those 5 things. And that's where the commercial innovation conversation should start, not at innovation and not at measuring. Someone who can come into your office and articulate, I know we need to do this to be successful. They've got my attention if they're articulating that correctly. The next question then becomes, how are we going to know if it works? And you can articulate that to me before I go out and spend a bunch of money buying data, right? It's, does it align with one of our priorities? at the end of the day, how are we going to know if it worked? And then you could look at really more investments in development. But the conversation doesn't start with innovation, and the conversation doesn't start with measuring. It starts with, is it aligned with your priorities? Because if it's not, it's innovation for the sake of innovation, which is not smart. And if it's saying, I've got this data where I can measure impact and therefore I'm going to use it, that may not be smart either. So you need that alignment in that initial conversation. You need the articulation of, how will I know it worked? It may come back to data that you don't have. It could come back to data you do have. But if you don't start with the right alignment, I think the rest of that conversation just goes sideways on you.
I love it. I love it. That is, frankly, it's the answer that I wanted to hear, because I just think about times I've been in conversations with folks and we wanted to go deep and be innovative, but all we did is stare at benchmarks and try to mirror what other people were doing. I'm like, I don't know if that's where innovation begins. But
yeah, I love that conversation if someone shows up to your office and says, we want to do this thing that nobody's ever done before. And you're like, there might be a reason nobody's ever done that before. We should think about that perhaps first.
Yeah, worth considering for sure.
Yeah, I would also add to that, because there's multiple ways that goes. We want to do something no one's ever done before. Yeah, but we need to know who's done this to see if this is okay to do.
Sure. Yeah.
So I spend a lot of my career hovering that, between innovation and practicalness, and it's as much art as it is science, but you do need to, I think what you're hearing more than anything, Frank, is there needs to be a candid, robust conversation.
Yeah.
That makes sure that it fits the strategy of that brand, and it fits with what the ultimate goals are for said brand or product.
Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. I thought for a second there you were going to go down the path of bringing the compliance Nerf gun to innovation, but that's worth considering as well. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to ask each one of you to give us a gift on our ways we close the session. I'll go with Damon, Paul, and then Sandy. What is the best piece of advice you can give our leaders out there in biopharma and medtech right now when it comes to them kind of embracing uncertainty and being successful with their teams and brands right now? Damon.
I'll actually say something that I often use in other settings, which is focus on doing the next right thing. And if you're not sure what it is, go talk to somebody. There's a lot of idea generation that happens in a vacuum, which is generally not productive. There's a lot of grandiose thinking. Focus on trying to figure out what the next right thing is. And if you don't know, reach out to folks and have a conversation.
Awesome advice. Thank you for that. Paul.
Yeah, I would say, continue to look at what you're doing. You don't, if it's not broken, you don't have to fix it, but you got to take a look to make sure it's working. It's working and delivering what you expected of it, not just because it's there. And question. I love, things aren't done in a vacuum. There's no absolute way to do anything. So collaborate, question, have candid conversations. But, I think what we need to do is quickly act, because sometimes we over discuss and next thing you know, it becomes a stalemate.
Excellent stuff. Thank you, Paul. Sandy, you're up.
So I actually would add in two, if you allow me. One is to embrace the future and to cling less to the past. I think that we've got lots of preconceived notions of how things have worked in the past, but the pandemic has fundamentally changed things. I think it's important that we're open to embracing new ideas, because now's the time. And then the second, to reiterate Paul's comments, is about speed and just looking at iterations. And certainly from my experience, going from large pharma to working into a startup and building a technology business, it's very important that we look at iterations to help with agility. So instead of it being a 1-year cycle to see, well, is this going to work or not? The fail fast to succeed sooner idea, and not getting stuck into discussions on KPIs is important. So embrace the future and really focus on iterations for agility.
Sage advice for sure. So I want to thank the three of you for your time and treasures today. I really appreciate it. If Damon, Paul, and Sandy helped you just show up to the next meeting just a bit sharper, please reach out to them and thank them on LinkedIn or your favorite social platform. So Damon, great to see you. Thank you for coming. Paul, it is always a pleasure sharing the stage with you. And Sandy, love the accent and the lesson behind it. Mm-hmm. If nothing else, I learned a little bit more about how you pronounce things moving forward. So I'll keep that in mind. But great stuff, guys. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed it. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in the next session.